Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this movie review as part of my 31 Horror Movies in May series. Today, we're going to take a look at more of a psychological thriller, and that movie is from 2007, Disturbia, which I have here on Blu-ray. It's a PG-13 movie, so yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. So, Disturbia is an interesting film. I saw this about 10, 12 years ago, probably was the last time I watched it, and I added it to my collection sometime last year for a relatively good price. And I remember I liked it when I first saw it. I thought it was a pretty effective thriller back in about 10, 12 years ago, the last time I saw it. And I still think it's a pretty good thriller after watching it now. So let's just go ahead and get into it with the setup and the premise and the cast, and then I'll get into my thoughts and review, pros and cons as I see them. It's definitely more of a horror. It's not a horror movie. It's definitely more of a thriller movie. Um, so I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it in my horror collection or put it out with my other genres as I have with previous films, just to save room for actual horror movies. I shouldn't say actual horror movies like this movie's bad because of it, but um, anyway, yeah. So Disturbia is a 2007 American psychological thriller film directed by DJ Caruso, written by Christopher Landon and Carl Ellsworth. The film follows a teenager who is placed on house arrest for assaulting his school teacher and begins to spy on his neighbors, believing one of them is a possible serial killer. So, if that sounds familiar, the movie does sort of take loosely off of um, obviously Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, and then also a little bit from Fright Night as well from 1985. So, troubled by the sudden death of his father in a car accident, outcast teenager Cale Brack punches his teacher, who invokes his father while reprimanding him at school. For the assault, Cale is sentenced by a sympathetic judge to 3 months under house arrest with an ankle monitor and a proximity sensor. Cale is initially happy with the punishment, watching television and playing video games, but his mother, Julie, frustrated with Cale's attitude, cuts the TV cuts his TV cable and internet access. Cale's bedroom leads him to watch his neighborhood using binoculars, including his new next door neighbor, Ashley Carlson, an attractive teenager, and his other next door neighbor, Robert Turner, a single man living alone. Upon observing his neighbor, he learns things about them, and one night Cale becomes suspicious of Turner after he returns home in a 1960s Ford Mustang with a dented fender, which matches the description of a car given on a news report of a serial killer at large. Cale befriends Ashley, the new girl in town, and his immediate neighbor that has been watching. Wait, Cale befriends Ashley, the new girl in town, and his immediate neighbor that has been watching. That doesn't make sense. Basically, he befriends Ashley, his neighbor, and they start watching the neighbor. The pair begin to spy on Turner together, along with Cale's best friend Ronnie. They observe Turner arrive. They observe Turner as he arrives home with a woman. She's seen running around in the house in a panic, but later appears to leave in her car. So that's basically the setup, the premise, and the gist of the movie. Then obviously it gets more intense after that. Um, so cast wise, of course, we have Shia LaBeouf as Cale Breck, David Morse as Robert Turner, Sarah Romer as Ashley Carlson, Carrie Ann Moss as Julie Brecht, Aaron Yo as Ronnie Chu, and Viola Davis as Detective Parker. So yeah, this is a pretty good thriller. I think it's some people even call it like a teen horror, a teen thriller movie, which I could kind of see. I mean, it does focus more on the teenage point of view, um, but I would call it a thriller movie at the end of the day, just a thriller movie. So let's just get into the things I like about this movie. I think the movie does a good job, which you don't often get, especially in teen, if you want to call it a teen horror movie or even a teen thriller, you don't often get development of characters. We're sort of usually given paper thin characters to, well, just like this person because we're throwing them at you. But in this movie, it actually opens with the main character Kale along with his father fishing, and then a tragedy happens where he loses his dad, and that kind of sets things in motion. when it comes to punching his teacher and then being under house arrest and then having his TV and internet cut off, and then having to basically watch his neighbors with these binoculars here. So it kind of sets everything in motion, and during that time, during the first and even part of the second act, we're kind of given some development on the characters. Certainly, Kale, played by Shia LaBeouf, David Morse's character of Robert Turner, Sarah Romer's character of Ashley. Um, yeah, those three I would say more than the rest. But yeah, it's we got good background on the main characters so that we can understand them better when the shit really hits the fan towards the end. I think the performances are pretty good, particularly by Shia LaBeouf and David Morse. I think both of them are really intense in their roles and very present in the movie that they're in their roles. So, yeah, we don't always often get that either in sort of thrillers or teen horror. The third act of the movie is pretty suspenseful and kind of edge of your seat of a thriller. It's fun. It's a fun watch and it's engaging. It also has a good score that really adds to the tension and the suspense in the second half of the movie, more so than the first half. I also don't feel like it's your typical teen slasher or thriller where characters make a lot of dumb decisions or are annoying. The characters actually make some justified decisions. That's not to say it's perfect. There's still one or two decisions I'd stay away from, but for the most part, compared to what we normally get, it's not the it's not the over the top, really stupid decisions to move the plot forward. Also, they have real conversations with each other. I feel like in this movie, not the dribble that we often get in these types of movies. So, like between Kale and Ashley, sort of that teen romance, kinship, whatever you want to call it, where he's kind of nervous around her and trying to impress her. Between Kale and his mom, even Kale and his dad at the very beginning of the film before the tragedy, and him and his friend as well. I feel like we actually have good dialogue and conversations there. I think the best scene in the movie to me isn't so much at the end; it's kind of towards the end of the second act, and that's where um, Kale puts Ashley up to spying on his neighbor at the store, basically, and she doesn't think that he knows, or she doesn't think that he knows that she's watching him, and until she leaves in the parking garage thinking that he's taken off and she kind of lost track of him. And all of a sudden he's standing and as she's about to take off, he's standing in front of her car. And not only does he confront her, but he actually gets in her car, pulls the key, and that's just a really creepy scene, a really high end tension there. And I think that's the best scene of the movie for me. Nothing really happens in terms of him like assaulting her or anything, or it's not like a chase or anything like that, but it's a frank conversation that he has with her to basically put the living fear into her that he knows what she's up to and make sure to pass the word along to anybody else. So it just kind of gives the audience an uneasy feeling about this character, Robert Turner, played by David Morse. Um, and this movie's interesting too because it starts out with a tragedy. It ends, so it kind of starts out serious, it ends serious, but in the middle, there's kind of a lot of kind of more teen drama slash teen comedy kind of stuff going on. You have some young kids put like a firecracker bag of dog shit, I think, on the front step where Kale has to go out and try to put it out, and then he runs after him until he remembers his bracelet starts going off, and he's got 10 seconds to get back into his perimeter of 100 feet, I think it is, and so things like that. And then, like I said, the sort of the courtship between him and Ashley, um, watching her in the pool and stuff, and her noticing and then coming over, and just the dialogue they have with each other. And there's some decent humor in the middle of this movie. I would say it's not the cringeworthy teen suspense or teen thriller or horror movie kind of humor that they try to put in when it's out of place. So yeah, I had to mention that. And I was going to say the movie's relatable in that second act, the humor, I should say. Good pacing to the movie, and just overall, it's an enjoyable movie, I think. Like I said, you start out with a tragedy at the beginning with his family, and that leads to the kid struggling at school and punching his teacher, which leads to house arrest because the judge has sympathy for him. I mean, all stuff that you could see happening and sort of playing out. And then his boredom leading to watching his neighbors, and yeah, it's definitely a feel of Rear Window and Fright Night in this movie. It's from 2007, so more of a modern day take on both of them, but they it certainly takes from both of those movies. So yeah, those are the things I enjoyed about it. As far as cons go, it is kind of a slow burn thriller. Like I said, not a lot happens other than the tragedy at the beginning. But for like after those first 10 minutes, I would say for the next 30 to 45 minutes, it's really more of like a teen comedy or teen drama kind of stuff going on where we're introduced and get to know the characters and the setup of the neighborhood and stuff, which isn't a bad thing. But if you're somebody that wants thrills throughout a movie, I'm just throwing it out there that it is kind of a slow setup and a slow burn in that regard. Um, More light and humorous in the end of that first act and into the second act. It's not an overly scary movie, of course, at all because it is like a psychological thriller. It's more about a creepy neighbor who becomes a serial killer, or he thinks he's a serial killer. More suspenseful, definitely not horrific or horror related, but more suspenseful. It was good to see Viola Davis in the movie, but I wish they would have used her a lot more. I wish maybe she would have been the one to come when his like every time his ankle bracelet went off, because she's just a brilliant actress, and she really was. She really didn't do a lot. She didn't really have a lot to do in this movie, so it would have been nice to see more of her. It does have typical jump scares towards the end when he's trying to find his mom, and some things happen once things are revealed, and you get those typical jump scares. But I don't know. I didn't feel like it was overly jump scary compared to some other movies. I didn't mind it too much, but they are there for those of you that don't like jump scares. And then the last con that I have is there are certain aspects of the movie that are outdated because it's 2007, and so they're just like at the forefront of like YouTube and some technology. They still have flip phones in this movie, and like videotaping with flip phones and things like that, so it does date itself a little bit. um but yeah, I don't know, overall I kind of enjoy it. I'm not the biggest Shia LaBeouf fan. I think he's very hit and miss with his movies and his acting. I think he can be good at times. um I don't think he was the worst part of the Transformers movies. I don't necessarily think he saved them, but there's a lot more wrong with those movies that he was in than him and his acting. And I liked him in Eagle Eye, which is a movie I think that came out the following year. That's actually probably my favorite movie with him in it. He can overact sometimes, though, and he kind of has when he tries to go off script and do some improv with sort of the teen awkwardness stuff. That can get a little bit brittle sometimes. But overall, I think he's a pretty good actor when he wants to be, when he has good direction. I guess that's the best way to say it. And like I said, David Morse really is the one that makes this movie, though, because if you don't have a villain or a serial killer that really sells it, then you got nothing, and he really sells it. So even though this movie's a bit outdated and it does have some tropes of a teen thriller, I think it works because of the setup, the story, how it all unfolds before we get into that third and final act. And it does have some good suspense. There's a couple of kills at the end, obviously. Like I said, wouldn't call it a horror, would call it a good thriller movie from 2007. So for what it is, I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. Some people might think I'm generous. Some people might think I'm not generous enough. I think that's a pretty good rating, 8 out of 10 for this sort of teen psychological thriller movie. I enjoy it. I can put it on and have a good time with it. It's a pretty simple story. It's not, but I like I said, I think they do a good job of setting it up. And the director, DJ Caruso, who I also think directed Eagle Eye, if I'm not mistaken, him and Shia LaBeouf seem to work pretty well together. So 8 out of 10 for Disturbia from 2007. Go ahead and comment down below, guys, what you think of Disturbia. Do you think it's more of a horror movie than I do? Do you think it's kind of a cheesy thriller? Do you like it less than I do? Please like this video and hit the little notification bell down below so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos for this series. And be sure to hit the subscribe button down below as well so you don't miss any of my great horror content coming up over the next several months. But yeah, that's my review for Disturbia. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and stay scared. Bye, everyone.